We made our entry into this place after experiencing only a semblance of resistance. Food, arms, ammunition, ancient and modern artillery material, flags, and numerous corpses were found everywhere. The ground was swollen with little mounds, indicating the burial places of the Chinese. Many of these mounds, freshly dug up, indicated that our enemies must have buried most of their soldiers killed during the preceding days. This was how Captain Verdier described his experience in Lamson. In what was thought to be a huge battle, the French were surprised to find an abandoned city. The Chinese had fled. They cheered over their victory, thinking that the Chinese must have cowered off. But even with Lamson won, the war was far from over. By early March, the war came to a bit of a stalemate. The Chinese had been able to stand their ground in Humhua, Tuyangguang, and Lamson. And very soon, the tides would begin to turn. On March 22nd, the Chinese raided the French post at Dongdang, a few miles north of Lamson. General de Négrier hoped to do an immediate surprise attack on the Guangxi army stationed in Zhenengguang, another village further north, which just so happened to be on the border with China. So on the morning of the following day, he set out northward with 1,600 men. The Chinese forces in Zhenengguang under Feng Zikai amounted to 30,000. But even without the numbers advantage, the French wouldn't hold back. On the first day, the French began a fierce attack on the Chinese in Zhenengguang. This only caused the Chinese to dig up trenches around the city, known as the Long Trench. And it was at this point that the French attack began to fall apart. You see, the plan was for Négrier to attack from the front, and for Lieutenant Colonel Herbinger to attack from the back. This would cause the Chinese to have to fight in multiple directions, giving the French a possible win. However, a huge fog began to set in around the city, and Herbinger ended up getting lost. Négrier, thinking that Herbinger had made it to his position, pulled a Captain Pickett and charged at the Chinese. This only caused the French battalion to go under heavy frontal fire from Feng's men. Men like Captain Verdier would be heavily wounded from the counteroffense, while men like René Normand ended up dead. In the end, the French had to retreat from Zhenengguang. The Chinese chased the French all the way back to Dongdang, only to stop by sundown. But nevertheless, the Chinese had won. They finally had their victory, and a deserved one at that. They had finally made some pushback against the Western imperialists. But they weren't done. Oh, they were so not done. On March 28th, the Chinese planned to kick the French out of the neighboring town of Quilloa. It failed, however, but it left General de Négrier seriously wounded. So command passed over to Herbinger, who really didn't want the job. It wasn't that Herbinger was a noob strategist. He was a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War after all. But he really didn't know what he was doing when it came to countering the Chinese in an unknown force environment such as Vietnam. And he wouldn't be the last one with that idea, I'll tell you that. It was also around this time that Herbinger could have also started getting malaria, considering the many mosquitoes that populated Vietnam. I would know, I went to Vietnam myself, and there would be times when I couldn't go one day without dousing myself in mosquito repellent. But I digress. So anyway, with his brain definitely not in the right state of mind, he believed that the Chinese were going to surround Lamson and cut off his supply line. So on the evening of that very day, he ordered his French forces to abandon Lamson and go all the way back to Chu. This left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. Constant infighting took place between Herbinger and everyone else in the French command, leaving them susceptible to Chinese attacks. These attacks never came, however, because the Chinese decided to regroup in Zhenengguang to plan their next move, only to hear the streak of good luck that they had just received. So by April, the French had to take a monumental L. Meanwhile in China, the government was split over what to do next. With our victory in Zhenengguang, we could liberate North Vietnam and kick the French back to Cochin China, or possibly even further. We could re-establish ourselves as the great power that we once were and stand up for ourselves against the West. That would be great and all, but there's one problem. Japan. The Japanese have been expanding their influence into Korea, and we need to start bringing more attention to that in the event that Japan might want to take it over. Heck, they might even expand into Manchuria, or Eastern China. We can't risk that. We have to end the war now. Maybe we can take Vietnam back one day, but we're too late now. So by April, a peace protocol was pushed out, and by June, Chinese and Black Flag forces withdrew from Vietnam, though the Black Flags did continue to harass the French in the following decade. The 1885 Treaty of Tientsin would be signed on June 9th of that year. The treaty itself didn't really benefit either side. It essentially established French control over Vietnam and made sure the Chinese would not have to pay war reparations. For China, this allowed more opportunity to focus more on Japan, which would become very important in the decades to come. And for France, this allowed further expansion into Southeast Asia. In 1887, the French later got Cambodia, and then later Laos in 1893 after going to war against Siam. With Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos under their belt, the French united the protectorates into the Indo-Chinese Union, better known as French Indochina. And with that, the Sino-French War comes to a close. But the century of humiliation continues on.